The first gunshot ripped through the quiet prairie, a sudden deafening crack that made Eleanor Hayes stagger in shock. Dust rose from the chapel's worn wooden floorboards, clinging to the hem of her wedding dress. For a moment, she thought it was an accident someone misfired in celebration. But the second shot, sharp and deliberate, told her otherwise. Her fiancé, Nathaniel Croft, was standing outside, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the blazing orange of the setting sun. And there was a strange, cold gleam in his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, commanding, yet familiar, the way it had always made her heart flutter. But now there was no warmth in it. "Come with me." Before anyone could react, before her father could rush to her side or the preacher could shout, Nate lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. Her scream was lost in the wind sweeping across the chapel's cracked windows. He dragged her through the double doors and onto a waiting horse, the animal snorting and stamping its hooves against the dirt as if sensing the chaos. Eleanor's heart pounded like a drum inside her chest, terror twisting into disbelief. "Stop. Nate, what are you doing?" she yelled, struggling against his grip. He did not respond. His face was unreadable, a mask of determination or madness. She looked around desperately. The townsfolk of Red Rock had begun pouring into the street, faces pale with shock, mouths open in disbelief. Her father shouted, "Eleanor!" But his voice was swallowed by the howling wind and the galloping hooves. Nate kicked the horse into motion, racing across the arid plains. Eleanor clung to the reins, trying to slow them, but he tightened his hold, and the horse surged forward, carrying them away from everything she had ever known. Dust and grit stung her eyes. The late afternoon sun beat down, highlighting the sweat glistening on Nate's brow. Her mind raced. Why? Why would he do this on their engagement day in front of everyone? As the town disappeared behind a haze of dust, Eleanor's fear transformed into icy resolve. She was 30 years old, and she had faced hardships far greater than this. Losing her mother to fever when she was just 12. Managing the family ranch alone after her younger brother abandoned them. Surviving years of drought and failed crops she had endured. And she would endure this too. The desert stretched endlessly. A golden sea of sand and scrub, jagged mesas piercing the horizon. Nate didn't speak, and the silence was almost worse than the fear. Eleanor observed him carefully. He wasn't reckless. Every motion was calculated. He knew these plains like the back of his hand, and that made her all the more wary. She scanned the ground for any sign of a path or a familiar landmark, anything that could give her a chance to escape. Hours passed. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows that stretched across the dry earth. Eleanor's wrists ached from the rope tied loosely around them, but she noticed that he had been careless, leaving just enough slack for her to wiggle her fingers. Her pulse quickened as she realized she had a chance. Reaching into her boot with nimble fingers, she felt the cold steel of the small hunting knife her father had once given her, a tool for survival more than defense. But enough if she used it wisely. Night fell, and the desert transformed. Shadows became indistinguishable from the terrain, and the air turned crisp, almost bitter against her exposed skin. Eleanor's breath came in sharp bursts, her chest burning from exertion and adrenaline. The horse slowed as Nate dismounted to check a distant ridge. Seizing the moment, Eleanor slipped her knife from its sheath and cut the rope binding her wrists. The leather frayed under her fingers, and the sound felt deafening in the still night. She waited, listening to the soft crunch of sand beneath Nate's boots as he moved away from her. Then, with careful precision, she unfastened herself from the horse and darted into the darkness, her wedding dress torn and snagged on thorny brush. The wind carried her frantic whispers across the empty plains. She ran, stumbled, and ran again, ignoring the scrapes and burns along her arms and legs. Every rustle of the brush, Every distant howl of a coyote set her nerves on edge. Hours blurred. The moon rose high, painting the desert silver. Eleanor's energy waned, but she forced herself onward, guided by instinct and sheer determination. She remembered her father's lessons, how he had taught her to survive when all seemed lost. She used the shadows to hide, ducking behind rocks and shrubs. Careful to avoid leaving tracks that could betray her. By midnight, she stumbled upon a small, abandoned cabin nestled between two rocky outcrops. Smoke curled lazily from a nearby chimney, suggesting someone had been there recently. Eleanor approached cautiously, every sense alert. The door creaked as she nudged it open, revealing a dim interior. Dust motes floated in the air, disturbed by her presence. A few loaves of stale bread and a jar of beans sat on a shelf. A blanket, smelling faintly of lavender, lay folded in a corner. She sank to the floor, exhaustion and relief mingling in her body. Sitting there, Eleanor allowed herself to breathe, the enormity of what had happened washing over her. Nate, the man she had trusted, loved, and nearly married, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. The ring he had placed on her finger weeks ago, a symbol of their love and future, now felt like a mockery. But in that dim, dusty cabin, Eleanor made a vow. She would not be a victim. She would survive, and she would find out why Nate had done this. The night pressed in. The desert alive with subtle sounds. The distant cry of an owl, the scratching of lizards over rocks, the whispering wind through the mesquite. Eleanor wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, feeling the chill creep through her bones, but warmth of resolve steadied her heart. She thought of Red Rock, of the chapel, of the town that now saw her as a symbol of terror and betrayal. She would return. She would not let fear dictate her fate. As the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon with pale pink, Eleanor stepped outside the cabin. The desert lay bathed in the soft morning light, its harshness momentarily softened. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of sage and sun-baked earth. Every scar, every hardship of her 30 years had prepared her for this moment. She tightened her grip on the knife in her hand and set, her eyes on the distant hills. She would track Nate. She would uncover the truth. And she would reclaim her life. The first step was always the hardest. But Eleanor Hayes had learned long ago that courage was born in the moments when all seemed lost. With the wind at her back and the knife at her side, she began walking toward the unknown, knowing that the West was vast, wild, and unforgiving, but also that she was capable of facing it head-on. Her wedding day had ended in betrayal, fear, and flight, but Eleanor's story was far from over. The desert, vast and silent, seemed to acknowledge her determination. Somewhere beyond the ridges, beyond the mesas, Nate Croft waited, but Eleanor Hayes was no longer the same woman who had walked into that chapel in a white dress. She was a survivor, and the West would soon learn just how dangerous a determined woman could be. By the time the sun rose fully, burning gold across the horizon, Eleanor had made a plan. She would not go back blindly, nor would she run without purpose. She would survive tonight, and tomorrow she would begin the hunt. The sun rose over the horizon, spilling pale gold across the desert as Eleanor Hayes pressed herself against a jagged rock outcropping, the wind tugging at her tattered dress. The night's flight had left her exhausted, muscles aching and throat dry, but there was no time to rest. She had survived the kidnapping, but the thought of Nathaniel Croft roaming freely, scheming whatever he intended, set her pulse racing. She needed allies, someone who knew the West and wouldn't be swayed by fear or by Nate's charm. She adjusted the blanket around her shoulders and picked her way carefully down the ridge, each step measured against the shifting sands. Dustwell was a full day's ride away, but the town was the kind of place where rumors ran faster than horses. Eleanor thought of the stories she had overheard in Red Rock. Dustwell was full of drifters, bounty hunters, and those who thrived on secrets. If she wanted to find Nate, someone there would know him, and they would be willing to trade information for protection or coin. By midday, Eleanor reached Dustwell. The town was a rough stretch of wooden buildings, porches warped by sun and wind, and streets layered in dust and dried mud. The clanging of the blacksmith's hammer and the low murmur of a saloon piano mingled with the distant braying of horses. Eleanor pulled her dress closer around her, now more a tattered cloak than a wedding gown, and stepped into the main street. Eyes turned, some filled with curiosity, others with suspicion. She ignored them, keeping her head high. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with smoke and the tang of whiskey. Patrons paused mid-drink to stare at her, muttering under their breath. Eleanor moved to the bar, her boots scuffing the worn wooden floorboards. The bartender, a barrel-chested man with a bald head, raised an eyebrow. "You look like trouble," he said gruffly. "I'm looking for Nathaniel Croft," Eleanor said. Her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I need information, and I'm willing to pay." The bartender snorted, wiping his hands on a stained rag. "Croft? You mean the boy who stole a woman in front of Red Rock? That right?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "That's him." A low chuckle came from a shadowed corner. Eleanor turned and saw a grizzled man, his weathered face creased with scars, a faded sheriff's star pinned crookedly to his vest. He rose slowly and walked over, his boots thudding against the floor. "Name's Silas Kane," he said, voice deep and gravelly. "And yes, I know Croft. You sure you want to get involved in his mess?" Eleanor met his gaze evenly. "I have no choice. He's dangerous, and he's planning something worse. I need to stop him, and I need someone who knows how he thinks." Silas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I like your grit, lady. All right, I'll help you, but listen to me. Croft's not just a slick talker. He's cunning. He's got men, he's got a plan, and he won't hesitate to kill anyone who gets in his way." "I'm not afraid of him," Eleanor said quietly. Fear had sharpened into determination. She would do whatever it took. By late afternoon, Silas and Eleanor mounted horses outside the town, riding cautiously toward the Croft ranch. The path wound through a canyon, rocky cliffs rising on either side. Eleanor's eyes never left the horizon. From the first day she had known Nate, she had trusted him implicitly, and the betrayal had cut deep. Now, every instinct told her she was facing a man who was capable of anything. As they approached the ranch, Eleanor's heart pounded at the sight before her. The property sprawled across a hidden valley with high fences and patrolling guards. Smoke from chimneys hinted at recent occupation, and the main house, a massive wooden structure, loomed like a fortress. Eleanor swallowed hard. Nate had been preparing for something. Whatever it wasn't impulsive. He had been meticulous, calculating, and dangerous. Night fell over the canyon, and the desert's chill set in. Eleanor wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, scanning the shadows. Silas whispered, "We'll wait until dark." Fewer eyes, easier to move around. "You sure you're ready for this?" "I have to be," she said, gripping the hilt of the knife at her belt. She remembered the terror of that first night, Nate's hands on her wrist, the way he had smiled, as though it were all a game. But she was no longer the same woman. Every step she took now was guided by experience, by survival. Under the cloak of darkness, they made their approach. Eleanor's pulse raced with anticipation, and yet a strange clarity filled her mind. Every sound, every movement mattered. The soft whisper of the wind against the canyon walls, the distant barking of a guard dog, the creak of a wooden fence, each was a potential threat. Each a piece of the puzzle. Inside the ranch house, Eleanor caught her first glimpse of Nate. He was not alone. Men with rifles and hard eyes surrounded him, But it wasn't the presence of armed men that chilled her, it was the look in Nate's eyes. The same man who had once promised her love now exuded obsession and cold calculation. The smile that had once seemed so charming was gone, replaced by a mask she barely recognized. Silas crouched beside her, whispering, "See that? He's been planning this for months. Whatever his reason, he's been careful, almost too careful. But all men leave a trace, and we'll find it." Eleanor nodded, her mind working rapidly. She had learned early in life that survival depended on observation and quick thinking. She scanned the room through the window, noting the placement of men, the shadows, the faint glow of lanterns on the tables. She counted, calculated, and planned. Tonight, they would gather evidence. Tonight, she would start taking back control. As they circled the property, Eleanor spotted a ledger lying open on a table, maps pinned to the walls, and letters detailing transactions she hadn't been aware of. Her pulse quickened. Nate wasn't just kidnapping her for power or possession. He was planning a heist, using her family's wealth as leverage to secure a gang's loyalty. Every smile he had given her in recent months now felt like a dagger twisted in her chest. Silas whispered, "We move in, grab what we can, and get out. But remember, he's unpredictable. One wrong step and it's over." Eleanor's hands clenched. The betrayal was suffocating, but it was also fuel. She felt a cold, determined anger. Nate had underestimated her as he had underestimated every woman who refused to be caged. She would prove him wrong. Hours passed as they crept closer, the house looming above them like a predator. Eleanor could hear Nate's voice faintly, giving orders in a calm, controlled manner that sent chills down her spine. He spoke of plans, of money, of men whose loyalty he had bought with promises of gold and power. Eleanor's stomach churned. This was bigger than her kidnapping. This was about an empire built on lies, deceit, and the manipulation of everyone around him. Finally, Eleanor found herself at the window. The ledger, maps, and letters were within reach. She whispered to Silas, "I'll get the documents. You cover the exit." Silas nodded silently, and Eleanor slipped inside. The house was warm, a stark contrast to the cold desert night outside. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by her careful steps. She approached the table, fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Every sense was heightened. Every shadow seemed alive. She grabbed the papers, securing them against her chest, heart pounding in rhythm with the tension in the room. But then a floorboard creaked. Eleanor froze. From the corner of her eye, she saw Nate enter the room. His eyes locked onto hers. The man she had once loved, trusted, and prepared to spend her life with was now the face of her worst nightmare. "Eleanor," he said, voice deceptively calm, a twisted smile curling his lips. "I see you've been busy." Eleanor squared her shoulders, clutching the documents tightly. "You're done, Nate. I know everything." His expression darkened. "You don't understand. If I fail, they'll kill you. You're my only way out." "I don't care," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "I will not let you control me or anyone else anymore." The air thickened with tension. Nate's men shifted, uncertain, while Eleanor and Silas prepared to act. Every second felt like an eternity, every breath measured, every heartbeat a drum of impending danger. The night was far from over, and Eleanor knew this confrontation would change everything. She was no longer the helpless bride. She was a survivor ready to reclaim her life. The night hung heavy over the Croft ranch, a velvet darkness pierced only by the pale silver of the moon. Eleanor Hayes crouched in the shadows with Silas Kane, her eyes fixed on the windows of the main house. Every detail mattered, the positioning of the guards, the creak of the floorboards, the faint glow of lanterns flickering behind curtains. She clutched the stolen ledger and maps against her chest. her pulse hammering in her ears. "This is it," she whispered to Silas. "We get in, gather what we need, and leave before they even know we were here." Silas gave a low nod, the weight of the mission pressing against his broad shoulders. "Remember, Eleanor, one mistake and it's over. Croft is no fool. He's clever, dangerous, and he doesn't hesitate. Keep your wits about you." Eleanor swallowed her fear and nodded. The past few nights had hardened her. She was no longer the terrified bride who had fled through the desert. She was a woman who had survived against impossible odds. Tonight, she would take back control. They moved like shadows along the rocky terrain, slipping past the perimeter guards with quiet precision. Eleanor's heart thumped with anticipation. Every step brought them closer to the truth and to Nathaniel Croft. The man who had once promised her a life of love and partnership, now revealed as a liar, a manipulator, and a criminal. Inside the house, the air was heavy with the scent of smoke and wood. Lanterns cast trembling shadows along the walls, and the muted voices of Croft's men drifted through the rooms. Eleanor stayed low, scanning each corner for threats. She had memorized the layout from the map she had stolen, but seeing it in reality brought a cold rush of tension. In the study, the papers were exactly where the maps had indicated. Eleanor set them down carefully, her fingers tracing the edges of ledgers, letters, and deeds. Her stomach churned as she read the contents. Croft's schemes were worse than she had imagined: fraudulent claims on neighboring lands, plans to cheat local ranchers out of their property, and a network of men he had bought with promises of gold and power. Every detail confirmed what she had feared. He was ruthless, and his plans endangered countless lives. A sudden noise froze her in place, a floorboard creaking somewhere above. Eleanor's breath hitched. Nathaniel Croft stepped into view, his boots silent on the polished wood. He paused, eyes narrowing as they fell on her. The man she had once loved now radiated a chilling intensity, a predator assessing its prey. "Eleanor," he said smoothly, voice calm but carrying an edge that made her skin prickle. "I should have known you'd come snooping around." Eleanor straightened, holding her head high despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I know everything, Nathaniel. Your plans, your lies, and your betrayal. It ends tonight." Croft's lips curled into a slow, menacing smile. "Do you really think you can stop me? After all I've built, all I've planned?" "I don't care what you've built," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. "I will not let you control me or anyone else anymore." The tension in the room was suffocating. Croft's men, alerted by the sudden shift in his tone, raised their rifles. Eleanor's mind raced. She couldn't rely solely on the knife at her side. This required strategy, quick thinking, and the element of surprise. She threw a lantern across the room. Flames erupted, shadows twisting and dancing wildly. Croft's men shouted, scrambling to contain the fire. In the chaos, Eleanor grabbed as many documents as she could and slipped toward the window. Silas, stationed outside, signaled her to hurry. Croft lunged, his face a mask of fury. "You'll pay for this," he roared. Eleanor didn't look back. She vaulted through the window, glass cutting at her hands but adrenaline numbing the pain. Silas caught her as she landed, and together they sprinted into the night, the fire behind them casting a hellish glow over the canyon. The sounds of pursuit echoed across the desert. Horses galloped, men shouted, and bullets whizzed past, kicking up dust. Eleanor's legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she ran faster. Driven by determination and the knowledge that she held the proof that could bring Nathaniel Croft down. Hours later, they reached a narrow gorge that would slow any pursuers. Eleanor paused, crouching behind a boulder, her chest heaving. Silas scanned the canyon, ensuring they weren't followed. "He's smart, Eleanor," he said quietly, "and angry. But you've got what matters: the evidence." That's his weakness now. Eleanor's hand shook as she clutched the papers. He betrayed me, she whispered. He used me, my trust. Everything. I thought I knew him. Silas placed a firm hand on her shoulder. You knew a version of him. The man he pretended to be. But now you know the truth. And the truth is stronger than any trick he can pull. The desert stretched around them, moonlight glinting off the sand and rocks. Eleanor felt a cold determination settle in her chest. She wouldn't just survive this, she would see Nathaniel Croft brought to justice. He had underestimated her, assumed her fear would paralyze her. He had miscalculated. The night was long, and the dangers were far from over. Croft was unpredictable, capable of any cruelty to protect his schemes. But Eleanor and Silas moved with purpose. Avoiding the main trails, slipping through ravines and brush, using every ounce of experience and cunning to stay ahead. By the time dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight stretched over the mesas, illuminating the papers Eleanor had secured. She spread them out on a flat rock, examining the details once more. Each ledger entry, each letter, each map added to the growing evidence of Croft's betrayal and criminal intent. The weight of the truth pressed down on her, heavy but righteous. Sheriff Whitaker will need these, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite exhaustion. He'll make sure Croft can't escape the law this time. Silas nodded. It won't be easy. Croft is cunning, and he won't go quietly. But you've done what few could survive him and gather the proof. That gives you the advantage now. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Nathaniel Croft still plotted, still schemed, still believed he could control the outcome. But she had changed. The terrified bride who had run through the desert no longer existed. She was a fighter, a strategist, a woman who had faced betrayal and lived to see the truth. As they made their way back toward Dustwell, Eleanor thought of the townspeople in Red Rock, of the friends and family who had feared for her life. She thought of the injustice Nathaniel Croft had been planning for so long, and of the reckoning that would come. Her grip tightened on the papers. The story would end on her terms. By midday, they reached a safe distance from the Croft ranch. Eleanor allowed herself a moment to rest, kneeling on the sun-warmed earth. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant pine, a reminder that the West was vast, wild, and indifferent, but also that it could be navigated with courage and cunning. She unfolded the ledger once more, reading the names of men Croft had bribed, the properties he had manipulated, the lands he had stolen. Every line, every detail, filled her with a sense of grim satisfaction. Nathaniel Croft had believed he could outsmart everyone, but he had not accounted for Eleanor Hayes, the woman who had survived him once, and who would see him stopped before he could harm anyone else. Silas finally spoke, his tone calm but edged with respect. You're going to make sure Sheriff Whitaker gets this, aren't you? Yes, Eleanor said firmly. Justice has to be served. Croft won't manipulate, steal, or harm anyone else. Not if I have anything to do with it. The sun climbed higher, and Eleanor's resolve only strengthened. Nathaniel Croft had betrayed her, but she had learned from it, grown stronger, and discovered her own capacity for resilience and courage. The desert had tested her, and she had survived. Now it was time for the law and for her to ensure that. Croft faced the consequences of his actions. The journey ahead was still dangerous. Croft's men could regroup, and the cunning man himself would not give up without a fight. But Eleanor no longer feared the unknown. She had faced darkness, betrayal, and near death, and she had emerged victorious. As they rode toward Dustwell, Eleanor felt a calm determination settle over her. This was her fight, her story, and she would see it through to the end. Nathaniel Croft had underestimated her, and that would be his undoing. The West was ruthless, but so was she, and she had every intention of proving it. The sun rose over the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the desert as Eleanor Hayes and Silas Kane approached Dustwell. The town, quiet in the early morning, seemed almost peaceful compared to the chaos of the previous nights. Yet Eleanor's mind was sharp, focused. She carried the ledger, maps and letters, proof of Nathaniel Croft's crimes, and knew that today justice would finally catch up with him. Silas rode beside her, his hand occasionally brushing the butt of his rifle. "You've done well, Eleanor," he said quietly. "This is the first time Croft won't have the upper hand." Eleanor nodded but didn't speak. There was no room for triumph yet, not until Croft was stopped. Her mind replayed every moment since that fateful engagement day, the shock, the terror, the flight across the desert, and the infiltration of the Croft ranch. Every step had led here. She had survived because she had refused to be helpless, refused to be a pawn in his plans. Today, she would see the consequences of his betrayal unfold. By mid-morning, Eleanor arrived at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dan Whitaker, a tall man with a sun-weathered face and a calm authority, looked up as she entered. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, and he quickly stepped forward. "Eleanor," he said, voice a mixture of concern and respect, "I heard about your escape. Are you all right?" Eleanor handed him the ledger and maps, her hand steady despite the lingering tension. "I'm fine. Croft's plans are here. Every transaction, every letter, every piece of evidence he used to manipulate people. He won't be able to escape this time." Whitaker carefully examined the documents, his brow furrowed. "This is more than I imagined. He's been planning this for months, maybe years. This proves everything: fraud, coercion, kidnapping." He looked at Eleanor with a mixture of awe and respect. "You've done what few could have managed, Eleanor. You've survived him, and now you've given the law a chance to stop him." Eleanor's lips pressed together. "I couldn't do it alone. Silas helped me. But it's time Croft faced the consequences for what he's done." The sheriff nodded. "I'll assemble a posse immediately. Croft won't have a chance to flee. You should stay close, he might try something desperate." As the morning wore on, the town stirred. Word spread quickly of Eleanor's survival and the evidence she had recovered. Dustwell's townsfolk whispered, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others openly praising her courage. Eleanor felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. For the first time since the kidnapping, she believed Croft's grip on her life was truly slipping. By midday, the sheriff had gathered a group of men, including a few trusted deputies and local ranchers who had been victims of Croft's schemes. They rode out together, Eleanor at the center, ledger in hand. The Croft ranch loomed on the horizon, a fortress of wood and stone surrounded by guards and the fences that had once seemed insurmountable. As they approached, Eleanor's pulse quickened. She thought of Nat, once charming, once beloved, and the man he had become, cold, manipulative, and dangerous. He had thought he could control her, bend her to his plans, but he had underestimated her resolve. Every step forward was a declaration. She would not be victimized again. They dismounted at the edge of the property, taking cover behind rocks and scrub. The sheriff gave a signal, and they advanced toward the main house. Eleanor's eyes scanned every window, every doorway, every shadow. The knowledge of Croft's plans gave her an edge. She knew the layout, the hidden passages, the weak points. Inside the house, Nathaniel Croft had become aware of their approach. He barked orders to his men, urging them to prepare for defense, to barricade doors and windows. But the sheriff and his posse moved with precision, closing off escape routes and surrounding the property. Croft's confidence faltered, replaced by the creeping realization that he had miscalculated. Eleanor stepped forward, her presence commanding. Croft froze when he saw her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice strained, no longer the smooth, confident tone she had known. How did you?" "I survived," she said, voice calm but firm. "And I brought the truth with me. You've lied, stolen, and endangered countless people. Today, you answer for it." Croft's eyes flicked toward the sheriff, then back at Eleanor, fury and fear mingling in his expression. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Enough," Whitaker interrupted, stepping forward with authority. "Nathaniel Croft, you are under arrest for kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy to commit robbery, and multiple other charges. You have the right to remain silent." Croft's hand shot up, but the reality of his situation settled over him like a cold shadow. The sheriff's deputy secured the property, and Croft was led away, still muttering threats. But powerless against the law, now armed with the evidence Eleanor had recovered, as the deputies escorted him toward Dustwell. Townsfolk began to gather, murmurs of admiration and relief spreading through the crowd. Eleanor stood a few steps back, allowing herself a moment to breathe. She had faced betrayal, danger, and near death, and she had emerged not just alive, but victorious. Silas approached, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. "You faced him and didn't back down. That takes more courage than most men in the West will ever know." Eleanor nodded, a mixture of exhaustion and relief washing over her. "It's not over yet. Croft's men may still try to recover what he lost. But at least now, the law has the upper hand. That gives people a chance to rebuild what he tried to destroy." Days passed as Croft's arrest and trial unfolded. Eleanor testified, recounting every detail of her kidnapping, the desert flight, and the infiltration of the Croft ranch. Her voice was steady, unwavering, a testament to the strength and determination that had carried her through the past weeks. The courtroom was silent, hanging on her every word. Croft's face, once so charming, was now pale and defeated, stripped of his mask of authority and cunning. The jury deliberated only briefly. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all charges. Croft was sentenced to serve time for his crimes, and the law ensured that his plans could no longer threaten the townsfolk, the neighboring ranchers, or Eleanor's family. Justice had been served, and it was final. Once the trial concluded, Eleanor returned to her family's ranch. The land bore the marks of years of struggle, dry fields, weathered fences, and the remnants of old hardships, but to Eleanor it was a place of hope. She moved through the homestead with a sense of purpose, inspecting the barns, the fields, and the fences. Every small task was a step toward reclaiming her life, toward rebuilding what had been threatened by Croft's schemes. Sheriff Whitaker visited, offering his support and guidance. "You've done more than survive," he said. "You've ensured justice, protected people, and reclaimed what's yours. Few could have done that." Eleanor smiled faintly, a weary but genuine expression. "It wasn't just me. Silas helped, and the townsfolk stood with us. But yes, it feels good to take back control, to no longer be at the mercy of someone else's greed and cruelty." The days grew longer, the sun warming the desert, and Eleanor found a new rhythm. She oversaw repairs on the ranch, tending to the fields, the animals, and the buildings. She walked the land she had always loved with a renewed sense of ownership and resilience. Her mind was clear, her spirit unbroken, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel the possibility of peace. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of red and gold over the mesas, Eleanor stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the desert stretch endlessly before her. She thought of the chaos, the fear, and the betrayal she had endured, and of the strength and courage that had seen her through. She breathed in the warm air, filled with the scent of sage and dry earth, and felt a deep, abiding sense of resolve. The West was harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving. But Eleanor Hayes had survived it, faced it, and conquered it. She had confronted Nathaniel Croft, reclaimed her life, and ensured justice for herself and the people he had sought to manipulate. She was no longer a victim, no longer a pawn in anyone else's schemes. She was a woman who had endured the worst the world could throw at her, and had emerged victorious as the sky deepened into twilight. Eleanor walked among the fields of her family ranch, the soft wind tugging at her hair and clothes. She felt a quiet pride in what she had achieved, tempered with the knowledge that life in the West would always hold challenges. But she was ready. She was capable. And she knew that whatever the future held, she would meet it with the courage and resilience that had carried her through the desert and the darkness of betrayal. The chapter of Nathaniel Croft's treachery had ended. Eleanor's story, however, was only beginning a story of survival, justice, and the unwavering determination of a woman who refused to be broken, who had faced the unforgiving West and emerged stronger than anyone could have imagined. And in that vast, wild landscape, Eleanor Hayes finally felt the peace of having reclaimed her life, her freedom, and her future.